Police officers wept with the shattered family members of Mohammed Ayub Pandith, killed by a mob of more than 200 people late last night outside a mosque. He was posted as part of a security detail. This as hundreds of people had gathered inside for prayers. Ironically, the officer was killed by the very people he was protecting. It's one of the bloodiest periods for the Jammu and Kashmir police, caught between their own people and terror.
A son bowing before the casket of his father, brutally murdered by a mob of 200 men in Srinagar last night. At his home in downtown Srinagar, a sense of utter disbelief. Why would Mohammed Ayub Pandith be killed in his own neighborhood? Pandith, a deputy superintendent of police, was in charge of security for a religious congregation at the Jama Masjid when he was attacked. Across Kashmir, there is a sense of outrage that this could have happened. The Chief Minister says this is a murder of trust.
उसको इस तरह से मारपीट करके उसको मार देना, इससे बड़ा शर्मनाक वाकया कोई हो नहीं सकता है। जो इनके पास अपने सिक्योरिटी के लोग थे, उनको बोला कि वो चले जाएं अपने घरों में शव खाने के लिए। तो इससे ज्यादा भरोसे का खून क्या हो सकता है?
Pandith, the DSP, was wearing civilian clothes when he was confronted by the mob. He fired in self-defense from his service revolver, injuring 3 people. But he was overwhelmed by the hundreds around him. He was beaten. In half an hour, he lay dead. His body unrecognizable. Till this morning, the police had no idea he had been killed. His body was in such a condition that it could not be identified. It was only after the DSP's family informed the police that he hadn't returned at night were they able to establish his identity.
The crowd was anticipated that crowd would be there, but such kind of mob raising slogans and lynching a police officer, murdering somebody on such a auspicious night. I think people in Kashmir need to introspect the fine line between what is good for them and what is bad for them is obliterating.
Hurriyat leader Mirwais Umar Farooq, who is also head priest of the Jama Masjid, says the murder is unpardonable.
The killing of police officer Mohammed Ayub Pandith by a lynch mob in Srinagar is a grim reminder of how far Kashmir's situation has worsened. Many see it as a disturbing sign of growing brutalization of the society because of continuous violence in Kashmir. In Srinagar with cameraman Sheikh Tariq, Nazir Masoodi for NDTV.
Well, let me introduce my panel to you right away. I'm joined by Anuradha Bhasin Jamwal. She's a member, Independent Women's Initiative for Justice, also Executive Editor, Kashmir Times. Joining me from Bengaluru, M.M. Khajuria. He's the former DG Police, Jammu and Kashmir. And also from Srinagar, Gaur Gilani, political analyst and journalist. Thanks all so much for taking our time to be with us this evening. Mr. Khajuria, sir, let me start by asking you, this has been one of the bloodiest 6 months that the Jammu and Kashmir police has seen. 16 people have died. It's been described as the highest number of casualties that the force has faced in the last 2 decades in this single period. What do you believe this signals for what they are facing on the ground, sir?
Basically, the problem is that the state government does not have a real clear-cut policy on the matter. They are perceived to be soft towards the terrorists, and there are indirect constraints on the police to act and react in a manner that is merited by a particular situation. The result is that the people feel totally frustrated, particularly after people like Zakir Musa had declared that those policemen who do not desert their duties would be liable to be murdered. And now this in this particular case also, this is not a incident that is taken on the spot. There was no reason for the people to attack him. And the fact that Zakir Musa's slogan was raised shows that it was not only premeditated, but the people were designated to kill him. Now when this thing happens, there's a lot of commotion around, and it appears that everybody is interested in killing the officer. yes, Kashmir society has to think about it, had to ponder about it, which direction they are taking, and I think the vast majority of Kashmiri people totally condemn this kind of brutality.
And we've seen a lot of that condemnation out there. But Gohar Gilani, if I could get you in at this stage, this is of course turning out to be a situation like we've always known, where there are no winners. Really, there are just losers at the end of the day after this kind of tragedy that we have seen. Do you believe that, we've tried to get the PDP and the BJP on the program tonight. We haven't managed. They weren't, the PDP especially wasn't willing to come in on the program. But there's been focus on Kashmir and just how the state has gone back to the kind of the 90s. Are we sort of back? Are all these incidents setting the state back decades? And do you see any political will at all to change the narrative?
Unfortunately, there's no political will, and that's the sad story. Slowly we have been living in this conflict for the last nearly 3 decades, and now there's a danger that this society will get dehumanized. And this, you see this brutal act, this inhuman act, dastardly act, what happened yesterday. But at the same time, I have a problem with selective amnesia and selective memory. There was one lecturer, Shabir Ahmed Dar, Shabir Ahmed from Shopaya, who was beaten to death by Indian Army. There was another 14-year-old boy just 2 days before, whose body was charred, and beyond recognition. So this is, the government forces are doing the same, and now there's this response also, which is very, very brutal. And that is the danger of this. That is where we have to all introspect, from Hurriyat Conference to the PDP to National Conference to civil society to everybody in Kashmir has to introspect that is this the kind of life we want for ourselves, because there has been conflict for the last 70 years in the absence of just solution, in the absence of any conflict resolution process. So are we going to live like this? What legacy are we leaving for the next generation? So the blame entirely lies right now with the PDP and BJP combined, which have also made these policemen very vulnerable.
Absolutely, and political leadership. Absolutely, the political leadership.
There's absolute lack of political will.
Absolutely. I'll try and get Anuradha Jamwal in at this stage. This is of course the point. Like I said earlier, there are just no winners. There are just only losers. Who is the enemy and who isn't? That's of course where the lines are blurring. To all those who say that there's no option, Anuradha, but for president's rule in the state, do you believe that that's fair?
It won't make a difference. First of all, let me condemn this incident, which is barbaric, unacceptable, and shocking and horrifying, extremely horrifying. And this is something that it is against Kashmir's ethos, it is against humanity, and we do need to ponder collectively, not only as a Kashmiri society, but Kashmiri society has inherited a problem which remains unaddressed, and for which political leadership, whether it is of the state or New Delhi mainly, because it is, when it comes to power dynamics within Jammu and Kashmir, it is New Delhi that is calling the shots. So New Delhi has a larger onus than the state government. I don't think it would make any difference if A party, B party, or the governor is heading the state. Okay. So it's not going to make a change there. Okay. But it's for New Delhi to engage with the people of Jammu and Kashmir right at the moment, and not leave the situation to just a military solution where not just the police, but even the army and CRPF and all the security forces are becoming vulnerable, and the Kashmiri society is becoming brutalized and brutal.
That's a good point, really. And when you say talk also, it's of course important to talk to all stakeholders. But Mr. Khajuria, I'm interested in your point of view. Would you agree? You of course also of the view, like our most, that political leadership really needs to stand up to the challenge and sort of grab the bull by its horns, really. But do you believe that President's rule would change things on the ground?
Well, in a way, it will probably, because at least there will be some clarity in what they want. As of today, we do not know where does the government of India stand and where does the state government stand. Their position, the coalition partners in Jammu and Kashmir and the people sitting in Delhi is most of the time even conflicting. So what kind of a message they send to the people who have to take on the Wahhabi terrorists on the terrorist field? Now, therefore, there is a merit, but in any case, one would prefer the elected government to deal with this situation, because that would be the right thing to do.
Okay.
But if that is not possible, and it looks as if it's not becoming increasingly impossible, then perhaps the governor's rule may be the only alternative left.
Okay, perhaps not either or, like you're saying, not the state or either the state or in Delhi, but both, or the point, of course, that you make that if nothing else works, then president's rule. But Gaur, come in here. You know, we've seen condemnation coming in the strongest words. It's been described as unacceptable, heinous, brutal. You know, there's just so much anger out there amongst the large number of people. But this was an officer who was a familiar face, that we are told. He wasn't an outsider. People in the area were familiar with him. This happened, the timing of it was being described as an auspicious time. There were all those 200 people there in the mosque praying, and then this kind of brutality happens right outside. What has shifted?
You know, see, I don't buy this argument that, you know, why was he killed on this auspicious night, even if it was not an auspicious night, even if it was not a religious occasion. I mean, this killing is barbaric anyway, you know, even if it was a normal day. Right. So I have a problem with that argument also. And second thing, you know, I don't think that, you know, everybody knew him in the mosque, because there was a huge congregation, and there are so many conspiracy theories floating around. One of them being that he was first being accused of being an intelligence officer who perhaps had an assassination plan for the Mirwais. So there are other, but we don't have the clarity, and police did not own him until the morning. We were constantly talking to police officers, and they were saying none of their officers is missing. And then there was another news that he's perhaps a CRPF officer. Then someone said he could be an IB officer. So there are a lot of conspiracy theories. But coming to a larger point, this is very un-Kashmiri-like. This is not something which happens on a daily basis in mainland India, where such incidents have kind of a social sanctity in many pockets, where mob lynching, cow vigilantism, and you know what happened today in Faridabad when
absolutely,
you know,
these murderous mobs,
siblings who were traveling after Eid shopping, and one of them is dead, Mohsin, and other people are critically injured. So such incidents do not have the social sanctity in Kashmir. And if you watch, you know, if you see the social media, that outrage which is there on the social media from local Kashmiris, boys, girls, who are condemning this act, and that gives me hope that Kashmiris do not approve of such acts.
Right, and that other death and killing that you mentioned, of course, also very tragic, or symptomatic of those murderous mobs that do seem to be running amok across India. But Anuradha, you were nodding your head there. Would you disagree with the point made on the timing of this killing, what was happening in the background to this brutality?
No, no, it's immaterial. It's immaterial what whether there were suspicious circumstances in which the cop was present there. It becomes immaterial in view of the magnitude of that brutality. However, we must not lose sight of the context. There is a context. Now, several questions emerge from this particular incident. One is whether there was a security lapse, whether whether there was a need for the DSP to be there, whether he had a legal sanction to be where he was. These are some of the questions. The larger context is even more important, which is, why is it that the youth have become so desperate, so frustrated as to kill, or to come out on the streets or pick up the gun to get killed, and they know they are getting killed, but despite that they're coming out. You know, it's kind of like an honor suicide. But they are, and we do need to understand why this is happening and need to address that issue. So how do you address that issue? First of all, I think all sides, it has to be a collective effort. I think even in Kashmir, let me finish first, please. There needs to be a collective effort, and by collective effort means the government needs to play its role without shooting from the shoulder of the military persons who are also getting killed by the day. And unfortunately, and then there needs to be the local leadership, whether it is the political parties in the government or the opposition. They need to have some understanding at some common minimum about how they are losing ground.
Absolutely.
Or even the Hurriyat, how this war is being glamorized within Kashmir and a war is being glamorized in mainland India. you know, all this jingoism and war with Pakistan or war against Kashmiris and Kashmiris getting branded, it's not going to lead us anywhere. What is happening
our choice
in
of words
Kashmir
and the
today
messaging,
is going to be
that's a good point, our choice of word and messaging. And you bring up a good point. The stone pelters, of course, also now include young schoolgirls, alienation that clearly can't get any worse. But I'm afraid I just have to wrap on that note. Anuradha, Mr. Khajuria and Gohar, thanks very much for your time there. We know that there's really no solution that one can come up with, but let's hope that keeping the focus and the condemnation, the strong condemnation that we've heard through the day just has some bearing on the ground. Thanks once again for joining us on the program.